Hey, first graders, it's Mrs. Seals back for our next science lab, our first science lab of the year 2021. I hope everybody had a great break. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about something called objects in the sky. We're going to be talking about the sun, the sun, the moon, the stars, clouds, things like that. Today, we're going to start off by talking about the moon, one of my most favorite things to talk about in science. So your target says I can observe and record changes in the appearance of the moon. So let's first start off by talking about what the moon is. Make sure we all understand. The moon orbits or moves around the Earth. That means the Earth is here in the middle, and then we have the moon orbiting or circling or moving around us. It takes about 29 days for the moon to go all the way around us one time. The moon is the Earth's closest neighbor in space. That means it's closer to us than any of the planets or the sun. It's much closer to us than anything else, actually. And the moon is made of rock. The moon is not made of cheese. A lot of kids think it is. The moon is not made out of, I don't know, somebody's face. The moon is a giant rock, just like Earth. So sometimes when I look up at the sky each night, the moon looks different. I notice sometimes that it has a different shape to it, or it looks to be a different size. Here are some different ways I've seen the moon look before. Sometimes I can only see a little bit of it. Sometimes I can see all of it. Sometimes I can see almost all of it, but not quite. Sometimes I can see half of it. Other times I can't see it at all. So I want to know, what is happening here? What is causing this? Is the moon actually getting bigger and smaller and changing size and shape? No, of course not, because the moon is made of rock. So the moon isn't just magically getting bigger and smaller, but here's what's happening. Since the moon is orbiting the Earth, we can only see the part of the moon that the sun is shining on. Since again, the moon is a rock, the moon does not make its own light. The light we see is the light from the sun reflecting or bouncing off of it. So we can only see the part of the moon that the sun is shining on. So now we're going to talk about some different ways that the moon can look. In first grade, you do not have to know the names of what we call these different phases, but you do need to know that these phases go in a pattern, they go in order, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So sometimes the sun's light is not shining on the moon at all. This is what we call a new moon. So that doesn't mean we're actually getting a new moon. It's the same moon that we've had for billions of years. But we call it a new moon because we say this is when the cycle of these phases is starting over. Okay, so that's a new moon. And then a couple nights later, I look up and the sun is shining on a small part of the moon. This is called a crescent moon because this shape right here that we see is called a crescent shape. It looks kind of like a banana, but it's not called a banana moon. It's called a crescent moon. So first we started with the new moon. We couldn't see it. The sun wasn't shining on it at all. And now the sun is shining on it a little bit. So that means the part we can see is growing larger. These phases are called the waxing phases. Okay, so sometimes the sun is only shining on half the moon. This is called a half moon or a quarter moon, and that would look like this. So again, the part we can see is growing larger. Sometimes the sun is shining on most of the moon. This is called a gibbous moon. So here I can see most of it, but not quite all of it yet. And then the final phase in this cycle is when the sun is shining on the whole side of the moon that's facing us. This is called a full moon, when the moon looks like a big, bright circle in the sky. Okay, and then what happens is the cycle goes in reverse order. So it says this is a cycle that repeats over and over again. These phases go in order. Once the cycle is over, it starts back over. We know what the moon is going to look like tonight based on what it looked like last night. So let's look at this picture. Here's the beginning of our cycle. Here's our new moon when the sun is not shining on the side of the moon that's facing us. And then each night I can see a little bit more of the moon until I finally get to remember what's called the full moon, where the sun is shining on the whole side of the moon facing us. But it doesn't just the next night jump back to the new moon. Now we're going to see, remember over here, we were seeing more and more and more of the moon each night. Now we're going to be seeing less and less and less of the moon each night until we're back at a new moon. So again, this whole cycle takes about 28 or 29 days, almost a month, from new moon to new moon. When we get back to the new moon, the cycle starts all the way over. So because of this, we know what the moon is going to look like tonight and tomorrow night and the next night because this pattern repeats. We don't skip over phases. We don't jump from a new moon to a gibbous moon to a crescent moon to a full moon, okay? We don't skip over phases. We don't go in reverse. It doesn't just stop and, start going backwards. It always repeats in the same order. We can't see any of it, and then we can see a little bit more each night until we get to the full moon, and then we see a little bit less of it each night until we get back to the new moon. That's why we call it a cycle or a pattern. So there are some ways you can practice this at home, and then I'm going to show, after I go over this, I will show you what the kids in class are going to do. So some ways you can practice the moon are, you can practice drawing what the moon looks like each night. Go out at the same time each night, look at the moon, draw a picture. You can keep a moon journal, so you could print off a calendar and draw what it looks like each night. You could make a prediction about what it's going to look like tonight or tomorrow night based on the pattern you're seeing. You could draw a picture of the different phases. Again, remember, you don't have to know the names of the phases right now. You just need to know this pattern. So another thing you could do is you could draw the pictures and then you could cut them up and put them in order from the new moon to the full moon and then back again. It's up to you. Remember that science lab is not required, but anything that you do, I would love to see. You can take a picture and email it to me right here. So the kids in class, what they're going to be doing, they're going to be making a fun little model of these moon phases using Ritz crackers and easy cheese or squeeze cheese, okay? So I'll do one really quickly. This is all, excuse me. This is also something you could do at home if you would like to. So I'll do it facing you. Each student is going to get 5 Ritz crackers. Each of these is going to represent a different phase of the moon. And the cheese is going to represent the part of the moon that we can see on each phase. So this will be the light from the sun, in other words. So I'm going to start with a new moon. So here's my question for you. If the cheese is representing the part of the moon that we can see, am I going to put any cheese on my first cracker? The answer is no, because remember, on a new moon, the sun is not shining on the side we can see at all. It's dark. So I'm not going to add any cheese to my first cracker. My second cracker, I'm only going to add a little cheese because remember, the next night after the new moon, or, a few nights later, because this whole cycle takes about 28 or 29 days, is going to be our crescent moon, where we can just see a little bit of the moon. So I'm going to just add a little bit of cheese to my cracker and kind of try to make that crescent shape to show that now the sun is shining on a little bit of the moon. So our pattern here is that the light we can see is getting larger. We started with our new moon where we couldn't see any of it. Then we could see a little tiny bit, that crescent shape. So then my next phase is going to be the half moon or the quarter moon, where the sun is shining on half of the moon. So the part we can see is growing larger. Okay. So I'll give you a minute. I want to see if you can remember, what will my next phase look like? First, I couldn't see any. Then I could just see some. Then I could see half. So my next phase is going to be the gibbous moon. That's the one where we can see most of the moon, but still not quite all of it yet. When you hear gibbous, think most. All right. There's our gibbous moon. We just have this little tiny area over here that is still dark. And then my last phase is going to be my full moon, where the sun is shining on the whole side of the moon that's facing us. And it looks like a big, bright circle in the sky. So there's my full moon. So hopefully you see the pattern, and you're recognizing that each time the part we can see is growing a little bit larger. I also want you to notice the side of the moon that the light is on is not switching. It's still the same side of the moon. It's just growing a little bit larger each time. And then remember, once we get to the full moon, it doesn't automatically just jump back and start at a new moon. It's going to reverse. So then we would have our full moon, and then I can see less and less of the moon each night until we are back at a new moon. So remember that this is a cycle that repeats in order over and over again, and we can predict what the moon is going to look like tonight based on what it looked like last night. I hope that you had fun learning about the moon and how its appearance changes in the sky. And I will see you next time. Bye, guys.